that's where I should hide.
According to the clock, it's time. So how about we do this thing?
Sounds good. So I guess I'll be, Bron and I discussed earlier, I guess I'll be leading it because Bron is such a really world-class note taker. So that's great. Works for both of us. So welcome to the JMAP meeting at IETF 112. We'll begin with the note well, which from looking at the participants list, it looks like everybody is familiar with, but we'll again say if you're not, that you should pay attention to this because it governs the policies on intellectual property rights for things that you say in IETF meetings and participation on IETF mailing lists and so forth. So if you're not familiar with it, please do read it. And we'll start with an agenda bash. We're doing the intro and note well now, as you know. Bron's going to start with JMAP blob. I'm going to go through SMIME on the mail side of things, and then delve into calendars and tasks for a longer period of time. Contacts. And then Alexei will be talking about some work that is going on in the extra working group that is comparable, that has a relationship to things that we might want to do in JMAP as well. So that's coming up afterwards. We've got a little bit of spare time, 15 minutes or so at the end if we're on schedule. And then we will go through our usual milestone review at the very end. Any adjustments or comments on the schedule from anyone?
If you add this up carefully, you'll discover this isn't even filling the full 2 hours. I was expecting more work to appear at this meeting, but we had an interim just a couple of weeks ago. So a lot of stuff was resolved there and not much new work's been generated since. In fact, the next slide on this set is my blob slide. So if there's no agenda bashing, I'll just go straight off this set of slides if you want to keep them going, Jim. The other thing I did want to say up the front of this is that I've seen in some other working groups there's been a bit more discussion around the Code of Conduct BCP 54 area, and in particular being welcoming to new people and not scaring them away too much with weird jargon and dismissal. So definitely to anyone who does come in, though of course I'm talking to people who aren't here yet in a lot of cases, please feel free to pop in and ask questions. If there's something you don't understand, it's quite likely there might be someone else who doesn't as well. So please do ask questions if anything's unclear. So this slide here is talking about blob, and this is a draft that is close to finished now. I have not uploaded the latest edits in it that have come since a couple of weeks ago. The one thing that was pointed out that I really hadn't done was defining the encodings really well. We have AS-base 64, but base 64 wasn't specifically referenced where it came from, it was just assumed. So I'm going to add references specifically to RFC 4648, which defines it. But the question then is, should we define AS hex as being a fixed case? At the moment it's defined as being lowercase in the document, but RFC 4648 says that it's case insignificant. You can use upper or lower or any intermixing of them. Does anyone have any comments one way or the other on that? Likewise, should we rename AS hex to AS base 16 just to align nicely? And would anyone want base 32? Should I include it for completeness or just leave it out because I don't see a use case? The other feedback I had was the expires property. The Cyrus server at the moment sets expires, so it went into one of the examples, and that basically says this blob will sit around on the server for a week before it goes away. So it gives a date to use it by, but that's not really defined anywhere, and I wonder if it's better just to not do it because there's no defined assumption of that. So I welcome comments on any of that. Once I have the feedback, I will update the document. I think Jim will ask you to do a working group last call at that stage, because I believe it's basically done. Neil.
Do you want comments now?
Sure, we've got time.
My views on those three would be everything else in general is case sensitive, and it's generally nicer if you can assume that it is, because then you can just do easier comparisons rather than having two case insensitive comparisons. So I would lean towards specify it must be lowercase. It's generally what we use for that kind of thing. I would pick as hex instead of as base 16 just because I think it's more obvious, just if you haven't read the specs, what you're going to get. And I suspect no one will ever use base 32, but who knows? But probably not. That's my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Ken?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we even need as hex. Was there a use case in mind, Bron, to have that in addition to base 64?
Brian, you're muted.
Yeah, local mute. Couldn't see it. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to ditch ASHEX. I don't see a particular use case for it. ASBase64 gets you the ability to transfer binary in a fairly efficient format. So, yep, that's it. That's the easiest. I will ditch it.
And as far as expires, I don't have a strong opinion either way. If we think it's useful, it should be fairly straightforward to document, I would expect.
Cool. Yeah, I'll just get rid of it.
Anything else? So, Brian, you're going to make those changes before we go to last call?
Yes, I will upload a new draft and ask you to do a working group last call with that one.
Okay. I prefer to start that next week after I'm back, just so I'm not...
Yeah. No hurry. Cool.
All right. Let's see, what else have we got in the slide deck here? Oh, that's milestones. Okay. We'll come back to that. So I guess S-MIME is next. Is there any more discussion on Blob? Okay, so let me figure out how to share the, whoops. I think I hit the wrong button here. Alexei, go ahead. I'm
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Are you happy with flipping through slides, or I forgot how to do that, to be honest?
I'm happy with flipping the slides if I can figure out how to. Oh, there's the close deck button. It's down there. Okay. I was trying to hit the little share icon for it. So, all right, hold on a sec here. So, yes, mine. There it is.
So there are actually two S-MIME. One is the old one, which just went through HG last call, and I will talk about this first, and then I'll talk about the new one, which is yeah, I think there were quite a few changes since last time. I vaguely remember I couldn't make it to JMAP session in July, so yeah, lots of changes between version 3 and 10, which is the current one. Major things is basically addressing comments from GenArt, Art Directorate, etc. Some comments about better formatting, split into subsections, make it easier to read. Some missing references. The biggest one were clarify the implicit trust model, that basically you need to trust your server with trust anchors and doing the right thing and not returning bogus information to you. And then Roman also suggested some extra checks for the security considerations. It's basically stating why certain things are not a problem, but instead of just assuming people will figure it out, just sort of spell it out. So that was good. There were also some changes related to SMIME status attribute extensibility. Main issues around there, I will actually have a slide on this, but the document allows for signed messages, but it's also kind of explicitly allows for signed and encrypted without, but that is supposed to be an extension to that. That's why the complexity here. Yeah, and then there was also a request to extend email query to actually be able to search for all SMIME signed messages, all SMIME signed messages with valid signature, this sort of thing. Next slide. So I will just go through various issues that sometimes I have an opinion, but I thought it would be a really good idea to check with the working group. Several people asked about why specifically 10 minutes caching time. To be honest, I sort of picked it from the air. I thought, I didn't want it to be 30 seconds. Reason for this is because serial retrieval and certificate verification and signature calculation, it is kind of CPU intensive and possibly network intensive. So we want to protect from the denial of service attacks. Certificates don't expire very often. So if there were no CRL in existence, then probably checking once a day would have been okay. But if we actually want to allow, I don't know, suddenly I discovered that my certificate is, my private key is compromised. I requested revocation, and how quickly do you want the servers to figure out that the certificate was revoked? I'm thinking 10 minutes, it's probably on the low side. Maybe change it to 1 day or something like that, but I sort of really don't have an idea. Any suggestions?
Alexei, is the 10 minutes like an advisory time, or it's, sorry, I haven't actually read this bit of the spec, at least recently. Like, are you saying it must be? I mean, I'm just wondering whether we should be specifying exact value or give the reasons and recommend a value, if you see what I mean.
Yes, I think it should be advisory, but you don't want one server to implement 5 hours and another 10 minutes just because we underspecified in that sort of sense. I would like to put the text probably should be no more than X, if it makes sense.
Yeah, okay.
I guess one comment I have on the revocation time is, I mean, revocation doesn't actually happen. I mean, doesn't happen all that often. I mean, when it's revoked, you perhaps want to pay attention to it fairly quickly, but a day certainly seems reasonable. I mean, if you are checking CRLs, checking a CRL every 10 minutes is a lot. So I think a day is a good ballpark.
Okay. Yeah, I was just I was thinking about like star certificates, very short certificate that don't have revocation time, that just have very quick revocation time, very quick expiration time. And I was wondering what they're doing there. What's the granularity, just for comparison. But yeah, tend to think that 1 day is probably good enough. If you have opinions, if you want to send on the mailing list, please do. Otherwise, I'll change the default. All right, next slide. Right, so SMAM status. So a lot, basically I had weasel words in the document saying, well, you can add extensions, and various people started asking me what exactly it means and how does it affect calculation of certain properties. Like there is one property that depends on all messages of the valid signatures. So if a new value is added, which is sort of similar to signed verified, like what I had in mind was encrypted plus signed verified, then it should be treated similar. So two options here. A lot of people asked about IANA registry. I don't really have any extensions beyond sign and encrypted together for this. So I'm not sure whether registry is going to be of much use. The alternative is don't create the registry, reserve a couple of extra values, don't fully specify them, but allow extensions to clarify that. So what do people think? And Murray, if you have an opinion as well.
I have an opinion of sorts, which is basically that JMAP is designed to you have to opt into capabilities to get additional things. So I don't think you need either an extension or adding known values, because a new extension would, by opting into using it, would automatically make those values become available, and that extension would also define them. So I don't think you need to define additional extension points here. Just say this is what this document defines, and allow future documents to change it.
Okay. I think it's important to actually point out that certain things are intended to be extensible. That was, and just add minimal text around that. But yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't think you need to actually go beyond that. Just say this is designed to be extensible.
Yeah, I agree. I think because you have to opt in, that makes sense, and then you don't have to bother with a registry for this, which it's not really a registry thing. Like the registry is a lot of work for not a lot of gain.
Yeah, I cannot see like million different values being registered. Yeah. That's just not going to happen here.
Yeah.
So can you speak up a little bit, Neil?
Audio, Neil.
Sorry, what was that?
There you are.
I was just saying, can you speak up? You were a bit.
Oh, sorry. I was just agreeing with Bron. I think, yeah, because you have to opt into the capability, that's the extension point. And so, yeah, no need to create an actual registry here.
Okay. Murray?
I think I agree. Just to play devil's advocate, an IANA registry might be useful as an index to these if more of them were to appear. But if it also allows for creation of an SMIME status value that maybe doesn't refer to an RFC. Maybe it's defined as someplace else. if you think those things are unlikely, then I don't think it's really necessary.
Yeah, and there is a registry of JMap extensions, so you'd be able to kind of find it kind of via that, I guess, for the capabilities. That is.
Yeah, Murray just reminded me while I actually like IANA extensions.
Yeah, I would probably recommend that if another extension comes along that extends it, that could create the IANA registry as well at that point. But it saves us having an IANA registry with 2 values in it that never gets updated, which is kind of the alternative there.
Okay, fine. All right, so I think I know what needs to be done. It's more like option 2. But I'll propose some text. Right, next slide. So in email get, there is a attribute that says, give me a SMIME status at the time of delivery. Do we want to be able to do something similar in email query? We have, so the document has verified SMIME or has a SMIME or something like that for SMIME messages that have valid SMIME signature at the time of request. Should we allow similar thing for the time of delivery?
Sorry, was that 2 separate questions? One about email/query and one about at delivery and at
just about email query, because email get already has an attribute for this, basically.
Cool. I think Neil was probably going to say the same thing I was, which is, yeah, you might as well define it. The server can always say cannot do it if you try and query it and it can't. But
yeah, I mean, what are the use cases here out of interest, Alexei? Like, I would have thought the delivery one might be more common than the verified now. But
I think you might want both. As in, you sort of want to know whether it was valid at delivery time. But if your message is really old, then it will expire. That's probably useful to know as well.
Yeah, you probably don't want to be able to do a query across the whole server for has valid SMIME now, because that could turn into a really expensive lookup if you have to do SMIME validation on every single email in your store.
Well, hopefully caching will help, but yes, you have a point.
It'd still be pretty bad, potentially. But the delivery time, which we're presuming that's cached at delivery time, that sounds very reasonable to me. Yeah.
Okay. Fine. So I'll add this in. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is another thing. Basically, another optimization in the document is that a lot of clients, what they do, they just want initially to display a list of messages, and they want to display an icon saying that this message is, like, I don't know, SMIME signed or PGP signed. And then when you click on the message, then they will tell you whether the signature is valid or not. So signed attribute value allows the server just say, well, syntactically there is a SMIME signature there, but I haven't verified it yet. Now that there is a attribute on email get for status at delivery, basically the question was asked, can the server ever return just sign as opposed to signed failed or signed verified? The way I implemented it is a bit of cheating in a sense of actually SMIME status at delivery doesn't need to be calculated at delivery. It just, when you ask for it, it will calculate the status as was valid at delivery and just cache it from that point on. So it's actually, despite the name, it doesn't have to be done at delivery time. So proposal is keep signed because it's still useful optimization, and clarify what the SMIME status at delivery means, how it can be, if it's easy to calculate at delivery, it can be, but it doesn't have to be.
Signed by anyone, right? There isn't any sense of alignment with from address or anything like that.
No, that will be done when specific SMIME status is explicitly requested for the message, and then it will be signed verified or signed failed if it's misaligned.
Right, but I'm thinking of signed by whom? I mean, there could be a signature from somebody else potentially, right?
Well, the document does say that it has to match the from.
Okay, that was my question. Thanks.
Yeah, this proposal seems fine to me, I think.
All right, thank you. Next slide. So Ben wrote that the immutability of SMIME status at delivery might have unfortunate interactions with trust anchor changes. So I think actually I should have double checked. I'm pretty sure that SMIME status at delivery is marked as server set. And I just checked yesterday that it's not the same as immutable. So server can change the status if an anchor got added and now it became valid, basically.
Yep.
So I think
That's right.
just clarify that this might happen.
Hard to
yeah,
change the status if it's trust anchor changes.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Is the server required to change the SMIME status of delivery if the trust anchors change?
I'm just looking at this and looking at the name and thinking maybe what we want is SMIME was once valid, which covers delivery, which covers you changed the trust anchors and it became valid, and you cache saying in the past the SMIME status of this was validated and good. And you can also clear that if there's a certificate revocation, but otherwise you keep it because it was good. It was good. Sorry, Neil?
That name would imply to me that it wouldn't be revoked once it gets set. It's always true, was once. You're saying if you revoked a certificate, it should go to false. That seems a weird transition in that name.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
You want to revoke it? Yeah.
But on the other hand,
if it was revoked after it was delivered, so it might have been valid at the time of delivery.
Yeah, the revocation is basically saying we think this leaked at some point. It would be nice if you could say when you think it leaked. So if you have something that you verified before that time, then you think it's still okay.
Well, there's also the converse case, isn't there, where a new trust anchor gets added maybe after the message was delivered, and it looks invalid, but actually is.
Yeah, but I mean that would be covered by this because you're saying it was valid at some point, and the some point is after the trust anchor gets added.
Right, but if
I-
you're saying it was valid at some point, then perhaps it still means that the server status needs to be updated after the initial delivery. And I guess my question is whether we're explicitly requiring the server to go through and make sure that all of those things are valid. I can imagine for a large email service that if a trust anchor was added or removed, there might be significant overhead in trying to make sure that all of the client mailboxes had all of their messages checked.
Yeah, you would need to key the messages in some way, being able to search them by which signature was on the messages. As a
you
user,
only need to check the one that failed verification before, right? So yeah, it's possibly expensive, but I'm tempted to say that probably implementation should do that if you want to keep it.
Yeah. As a user, if I had this feature on my server, what I would be wanting to see is, should I trust this message? Like that's the signal I want.
Yeah.
And that is true in the case where the message arrived and was signed by a key that was valid at the time and was validated by the server as being valid for that signature, even after that time now expires. So if I come back and look at my mailbox 20 years later, I still want to see that message is trustworthy because I validated it at the time and the key was valid at the time, and that certificate has not been revoked since then, saying it was compromised. On the other hand, if I receive something that was signed with a compromised certificate and that certificate then gets invalidated, I want to know not to trust that message anymore. Like that. That's the cases as the user. What I want to know is, should I trust this message?
Which yeah, I agree.
And I want to be able to tell that after the key expires.
So are we
And I think
treating revoked certificates differently from expired certificates then? You mentioned like 20 years later.
Yeah, I think so. That if a certificate gets revoked, then you need to know that you shouldn't trust this message. If it's revoked like close by.
The semantics of revoked and expired are very different. So yeah.
Well, they are, but frequently expiration is used as a proxy for you don't need to revoke it anymore after it's expired.
Exactly.
Well, but the point is that revocation says, I know this was compromised. You don't want to trust things that were signed before the revocation, where expired says that it was good until it expired, and anything that was valid before the expiration needs to continue to be valid. So that's the difference in the semantics.
Sure.
I forget, does a CRL have a revocation? Yeah, it has a revocation date on it.
Yeah.
But does it, can it be predated? So,
but a
can I
CRL
say,
typically.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. A CRL typically doesn't have entries for certificates that have already expired. I mean, part of the reason for expiration is to constrain the sizes of that CRLs get to be.
So what's the risk case here? That you discover later that the certificate was compromised, but it has already also expired. So people may have received messages from it before the expiry date that they should no longer trust. Like that's the question is, do we need to handle that case? And if so, how do we handle it? But otherwise, you don't want the message itself to just disappear when the key expires, which it
would be very
goes
bad.
untrustworthy.
Yeah.
Well, it shouldn't disappear, but you shouldn't assume that. I mean, it's almost like there's a third state here with expiration that says, I don't know whether it's valid or not anymore. Because
yeah, but you know pretty well.
The user experience for that would be terrible.
I know. And it's but it's for that reason that generally you consider expired certificates to be invalid. I mean, they're invalid for a different reason than a revoked certificate, but they're still invalid.
Well, They're invalid for new messages. That is different from having never been valid,
Right.
which is what it feels like to the user if they try and validate that message in the future.
Right. If you validate a message today with a valid certificate and a year from now that certificate expires, the message is still considered to have been validated. And any user experience that doesn't include that is going to be terrible.
Mm-hmm.
We have first-hand experience of this because Apple Profiles, which is how you can easily install mail, contacts, etc. settings, do exactly this. After our certificate's valid at the time of installation, later point it expires, we renew it, and now if you go to your settings, it says that the profile is marked as scary red warning thing, even though it works fine. But then the users ask us what's going on, and yeah, it's so silly. It was valid when they installed it, and then suddenly you decided later that now it's expired. You're going to show a warning on it. Alexei, I just have another question on this actually.
Okay, go on.
Because it's not immutable, does that mean if it changes or could have changed, the email will show up in email/changes? Or no? It needs to be documented either way, I guess. Normally, the email/changes would return anything where one of the mutable properties, the IDs of anything where the mutable properties may have changed.
Okay, can you send me a quick note on this?
Yeah.
So that I don't forget.
Yeah.
So where are we on this one? Bron wants a semantic change. Well, slightly different attribute.
Well, I'm wondering if it needs a name change. That's all.
Okay.
Well,
the description has
semantics
to change as well.
Yeah, the semantics and description need to match. But what I want from this is to say this was considered trustworthy at the time it was inserted into the mailbox. It was validated by the server. It hasn't. The key hasn't been. The certificate hasn't been revoked since.
Yeah, I think the actual name is fine for that. I think that's just the description you need to go with it. I don't think we're going to get all of that into a name. I think S-MIME states that delivery is perfectly good, short way of summarizing that.
Okay, fine. I'll tweak the description then.
So Ned's comment in the chat there, which looks like it was about now from the timestamp, was the name says S-MIME status at delivery. That seems to me to be the status at a fixed point in time, which is my argument against the name, because the fact that assumption is made from the name.
Yeah, it's the status at that point in time, but not it's of the message if you validate it at that point in time, not we validated at that point in time, and now that's what we're showing potentially.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Can you suggest?
I know what you mean, Bron, but I'm just not sure you're going to come up with a name that's any clearer without being like 10 million miles long.
Yeah, all right. I'll put myself in action to think about that name and see if I can come up with anything clearer to propose. Cool.
All right. Next slide. Basically signed verified and signed failed were going into much details about which conditions which check should be covered, like serial checks and various other things. I think Roman suggested just to reference existing RFCs. I don't think it's quite sufficient. Because implementations vary. I don't think existing RFCs say, for example, that the from header field email address has to match from in the certificate. So I will try to add references. Well, they already mentioned earlier in the document, but I'll try to clean this up to make it more explicit, saying that these are important examples of things that needs to be checked. And yes, answering my own question, I think I do try to fix some minor deficiencies in prior RFCs, but I kind of don't want to propagate them to new implementations. I think that's it on this one. So yeah, this was actually quite curious. Very good comments from ISG, but none of them are blocking. So in theory, I could have just ignored them all. But I think it was a good discussion to actually, they made me think, and I think it was a good discussion today. So I'll post a new draft. I'll ask people to double check on the mailing list, and then we'll hopefully get this approved. Right, shall we move on to the this MIME draft now?
Bear with me a sec while I get used to this. Yeah. I keep forgetting where the right button is to share from the. There we go. I found it.
It's,
Okay.
yeah, the share preloaded slides one. Looks like a document.
Yeah. Okay. So. Where is my signing and encryption? Is that the one that you're looking for, Alexei?
Yes.
Okay, hold on a sec. I've got the wrong. Ah. Okay, I'm messed up here. Sorry about that. Where is the right button?
So it's under your name, second one along. It looks like a document. Share preloaded
That one.
slides.
Good, thank
Yeah.
you. I got the slides up on my own screen because I used the other button that looked like a folder.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, hold on a sec.
At Meet Echo, your interface still confusing, unfortunately.
Signing and encryption. There we go. Thank you. Sorry for the segue here. Go ahead,
No
Alexei.
worries. So the previous draft was about signature verification on received mail, and this one is how to generate signed and only encrypted messages when sending. Fairly simple, really. Email set has two extra attributes, both optional and both by default false. So if they're not specified, then basically JMAP behaves just as without this. So if both are specified and true, then it's first signed and encrypted. Next slide. So yeah, I did. I posted a new version in July. Then I think I made after the adoption call, I posted it as a working group document, and something has changed in XML to RFC rendering. So it's actually, there is a bug that it sort of moved text in random ways when vSpace was used. That looked very awkward. So I just noticed it a few days ago. So I yesterday, I think. I posted a new version to restore the text. So otherwise, there was no changes from 01 to 00. So open issues. It's quite common. Well, some implementations do multi-part sign. Some do application PKCS 7 MIME when signing. Do we need a way to control this?
I have a suggestion.
Yep.
These sound like they're the kind of things that you want to set on an identity rather than on individual emails. So you would set this on your identity.
Sounds good to me.
And presumably that's where you would set key names or key data as well.
At the moment, it's out of scope. It's sort of magic. But yeah, if there was an extension for that, that's where it would go as well, yes.
Is it worth doing that in this extension? Just defining that it's stored on the identity, or defining how to specify it on the identity?
As in, if you have multiple keys, which one to use?
Yeah. So you would create an identity for each key, and you would select the one that you wanted, presumably. Or you'd have some way to specify the key as part of the signing.
So do you actually put the key material into the identity? That seems possibly not. And if not,
No.
you have a way to reference them then, Bron. So you need to be able to get the list of what keys I have. I don't know. I think it's going to complicate it a lot once you start.
Yeah.
I would rather not put the key material itself. It just say that it's out of band, whatever it, however you manage it for your system. Like for us, it's going to be like PKCS 12 stored in LDAP, for example, which is as much as I like our implementation, I don't think everybody will implement it like this.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
I just wanted to ask, with the creating the structure, is the idea you would create the body structure as you normally would with JMap and then wrap that whole thing in a new kind of MIME, like the multi-part signed or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So I actually, to be honest, I struggled here a little bit because what my implementation does, it creates message on send. But I thought it would be slightly better to create a message and then just keep the send sort of simple. But I'm open to suggestions.
Well, are you storing the signed version in your draft or in your sent folder as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Then I think you want to do it when you create that email, not in the sending bit.
Yeah, so I think email set is better for that. So that's but Neil, if you can double check that what I wrote, it actually makes sense.
Yeah, I'll read through that and see if there's anything that jumps out.
Right. So okay, suggestion so far is multi-part sign versus application PKCS 7 MIME have a Boolean in the identity. I assume header protection is similar thing in the identity. Possibly be able to list keys without managing key material itself in the identity object. Then the other thing that is an open issue is whether automatic SMIME decryption is something we want to have here as well. Again, it can be yet another extension, I suppose, or it can be just part of this, just for convenience. I'm open to suggestions.
I mean, I guess
Some of the NIST specification. I forgot what the specification was. It suggested that you automatically decrypt and store decrypted version in a secure store, so that you avoid the issue of key expiration, all of this. But
Is the idea you would only decrypt on demand, like when you fetched it, or you would like the secret store where?
Yes.
On the server or client?
Yes, you can. Yes, I would decrypt on demand.
Hmm.
I mean, I suppose you can auto decrypt everything, but
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, how seamless should it be to the client, or should the client need to explicitly request to get encrypted? Kind of. Is it just when you fetch it with email get, it automatically decrypts it in some way? I don't know whether that's actually a good idea or not.
there are lots of things that can be, if it's a simple structure, like if it's application PKCS7 MIME with just encryption or signature and encryption, then you can sort of do that automatically. If it's if you have a bunch of encrypted attachments in a message, then it becomes more interesting.
Yeah.
I'm happy to leave this be, and just people can think about this, because obviously it does add quite a bit of complexity.
Yeah, email get already defines a bunch of Boolean options like fetch text body values, fetch HTML body values, max body value bytes, that kind of thing that control what's returned. So adding another Boolean for decrypt seems like an easy way to do that. So if you want it to be decrypted and get back a parse of the decrypted body, you just pass a header or pass an extra property in the get at the top level.
Okay, can you can we minute this, or can you send me an email?
Yep,
or both?
I'll definitely minute that.
Thank you. Because yeah, I was thinking about, like, you know, creating a blob ID and then parse it into email parse, but your proposal sounds simpler. Right, any other comments on this one? I think I have one more slide. That might be it.
I didn't find one.
Okay, then
I just had 3
yeah.
slides there.
Yeah. I mean, in certain way, this document is, other than decryption, it's kind of much easier because there aren't that many attributes on the sending side, but there is quite a bit of complexity implementing it. Obviously, where the S-MIME signature verification is sort of the reverse.
Cool. I assumed that these would go a lot faster than they did, which is probably because I didn't read through the slides and work things out. So we're well behind on the agenda, but luckily we have heaps of extra time. But I guess we're up to JMAP calendars, which is not going to take the 20 minutes that that we would expect. There isn't I think much for this one.
I don't think there's actually much to say, like, especially as we talked about this at the interim meeting a few weeks ago, and obviously there's not been a lot of time for much stuff to happen. We're still trying to get some more implementation experience. I'd hoped to have that by this meeting, but various things got in the way. But we are so close to rolling it out in quite a few places. So definitely by the next meeting, we will. I've got a small list of to-dos to the spec based on our previous meetings, and I'm being a bit lax in updating that. So apologies, I will also get to that. Yeah, I don't think there's much to say today, though, unless someone wants to talk about it. I suggest we move on to the tasks.
Hi.
Hey, that was quick.
Yeah, quicker than expected. Okay. Yeah, so today Hayo and I are going to talk about JMap for tasks. So there is one minor change that I did since the last interim meeting. Perfect. I essentially made assignee part of a JS Calendar participant role property. So it's a new value that it can be instead of having it as an extra object that basically was the renaming of the thing that is in JS Calendar in JMap for Calendar. And we also have published the survey of various task systems. And this is where I give over to Hayo to give an introduction to it.
All right, thanks. Yeah, just to give some more context, I think with JMap for tasks, we are, in an earlier stage than we are with a lot of other JMap stuff, which I think started much earlier. And our observation, which I think we in part already discussed in the previous meeting, is a little bit that unlike email, contact, and calendaring functionality, there seems to be more differences in tools supporting tasks. And that led us basically to survey also different tools and to look a little bit into them in terms of how to design the JMap for tasks specification. There is one major question which comes out from time to time and is also touched a little bit by the recent discussion on JMap for Thief on the mailing list. And this is a little bit a discussion about, what is the intention or goal of JMap in a certain sense. So, and in how far is it really desired that JMap is also used by existing systems in order to adopt JMap to expose data which is already there. And I think we discussed about that in the last IETF working group meeting, and there was some positive feedback with respect to tasks to look into different tools which are not core groupware or webmail tools. And this is basically what the survey was about. So to look also not just into groupware and webmail tools, what we also did, but also into tools like issue tracking systems or those Kanban style systems like Trello and these kind of things. And yeah, Joris, I think I hand over again to you.
Yeah. Okay. So just a short overview of about what we did and how we came to that to those results. So the initial scope of the survey was that we chose 3 different kind of systems: groupware systems like OX, for example, Kanban style systems like Trello, as well as issue tracking systems like Mantis. All of them use tasks in one way or the other. And the goal was here again to identify potential gaps in current JMap for Calendar, and also identify common or distinct features between those systems. The approach was then to look at the UI features of each system, categorize a certain feature so we can compare the values and also can count usage across the different systems that we observed in the survey. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So the first results can be found at the GitHub. Feel free to leave comments there if you want. Could also upload new revisions in case that makes sense. If there are if there's some important feedback. So the most important observations of that survey are that task systems are heterogeneous regarding some features. So I didn't find of the system surveyed, I didn't find a system that had implemented all features of JMap for tasks. And so the result of that is that probably developers that look at the JMap for tasks spec will not want to implement the whole thing, basically. And especially some more complex features is something that's some developers might want to skip, and it might make sense to identify some that might be optional or separate from the core features. But yeah, core features is a good point. It also has become obvious that task systems are homogeneous regarding most core features. Yeah, that's basically the main point here. I think you can go to the next slide again. Yeah, so here to spark some discussion, maybe we listed a bunch of properties or features that are currently within JMap for tasks, but are not supported by all systems that I surveyed. For example, alerts, an assignee, attachments, recurrence, or relation. Especially recurrence is, for example, quite a complex thing to implement. And if you don't need it at all for your application, it might make the spec a bit easier to read. Maybe, I don't know. It's a point for discussion. The suggestion here is to come up with a way to group them somehow and make them like an optional separate capability, maybe some kind of an optional feature, maybe. Okay. And yeah, so I also identified some features that are not yet present in JMap for tasks, but some systems are using them. There are some kind of complex properties like a checklist, which we already shortly talked about in previous meetings. Also, a comment list or a discussion that is attached to a task, which quite a lot of systems used. Also, quite a lot of systems used a history, where you could look at old revisions of a certain task, and there were some additional simple key value style properties observed. So the suggestion here is maybe to extend JMap for tasks somehow with those features to support most systems observed, maybe. Yeah. I think we can go to the next slide again and probably discuss afterwards. So the next step here in general for the survey are we would continue the survey a bit further and refine it, gather feedback, work it in. We also want to reach out to developers and vendors about JMap and stuff that they would require, and yeah, update the spec obviously with feedback from various places. Is there anything you can add, Hayo, to the?
No, I think thanks. That sounds good so far.
Or anyone else?
Yeah, if I can make a suggestion. So one idea here for path forward is so that the data format is actually kind of JS calendar. It's the task object within that, right? Mm-hmm. And then JMap tasks is kind of the having a server to support that and being able to store it and manipulate it in a few ways. So the data format's easily extensible because there's registry for everything. You can register extra stuff. So I wouldn't worry about all the little like key value stuff where there's one, app that's using it. Like they can always just register a new property with IANA. It's pretty straightforward. If need be, if us trying to do everything is not worth it. There's common stuff, then we should try and register those. Although the complex stuff, I wonder if that should actually be a separate data type over JMap, like or some separate in some way, like history seems interesting, and comments as well as potentially a separate data type. But either way, and then the final thing I was going to say is the server could we could have a set of common functionality that we know is highly common that must be supported by any server if it wants to support JMap tasks, just because otherwise it's impossible for a client. But then the server could advertise and hear all the other property names that I support. and in the capabilities. So you can just check, does it support the recurrence rules property? If it does, I'll show my recurrence rules UI. If not, I won't, because I know the server doesn't support it. So that's my suggestion for then making it adaptable, because as you say, yeah, there's a lot more differences here.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
We've got a little bit of a queue, I think. Michael is next, I think.
Okay. Maybe as a short comment before Mike speaks, because
Sure.
it's just related to one comment I think he made earlier. So I think Neil mentioned the history thing. So it was actually put in brackets because I think I remember, Mike, you mentioned it in a previous CarConnect meeting as a generic thing you were thinking about, or even having implemented somewhere in either iCalendar or somewhere, right? Do you
Yes,
remember
I mean,
what? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
well, that was going to be my point. Is I don't see anything that you said, suggested that isn't applicable to regular events, because we've had the same kind of idea. We want some sort of auditing for events and what happened to them. I think all of these are features that could be. I mean, recurrences. Support of recurrences is even sketchy in a lot of event tools. So I don't think there's any difference there. We really only want one form of recurrence support, otherwise things get really confusing. So you either support it or you don't. Yeah, I just don't. I think we want to try. I don't think we want to try and have much in the way of different support between one or the other.
Not 100% sure I got your point, Mike, because as for the recurrence, there was no thing like a separate recurrence. I think it was basically if or if not some certain task.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I found it almost as iffy in some just calendars that are around. So it's a general problem.
Yeah, the hard bit here is that a lot of the systems that we'll be storing to are not using iCalendar under the hood. They're using some custom database format that we need to map in and out of reliably to this. So certainly being able to say you can't write anything from this whole subset of the full JS task because the server just doesn't have a way to store it and doesn't have a way to understand it. I quite like Neil's idea of having a list of capabilities in the server side advertisement of this feature. It can say with this particular capability, here's what we support, and the server, this is what you can use. I think that's a good way to have server capability discovery.
So just for about the history topic again, so that was me who at last IETF was discussing this in context of JS Contact. And I think to remember I promised to write up a draft for that, but I didn't do it yet. So, these topics seem to converge on the various data types, so that might be a booster for my ambitions on coming up with a document. So I'll do that.
Maybe a short comment. So I think it was not necessarily it's I think a little bit a special feature, because in some systems it seems mainly like an activity stream, like something you don't engineer as a user, but which is generated from your actions. So certainly, like an audit trail is somehow right. My remark is basically in the direction. It's certainly, I think it's an interesting thing. I think not so many systems expose it currently via API or something, because they consider it rather as some system generated and displayed thing, not something you can influence or read out with the tool even. But that I think even makes it interesting, because it shows up, as you said, that since a lot of tools are using these kind of concepts, that this might be something that needs or can have some attention. But I wonder. I think it's quite diverse still in implementation.
We're losing most of the audio here. At least I am.
Ah, sorry. But Robert nodded, so you.
Yeah, I got it all.
Okay.
So in terms of expectations, so what we discussed in terms of JS Contact was to have and not only being defined only for JS Contact, but rather a generic history that tells the values of a property at various points in time. So I'm not sure now if that is in line with what you mean when you were talking about history in context of tasks, but
yeah, I think we can discuss, and we will be happy to look at something when you write something down and maybe discuss on that further then.
Yeah.
Okay, any more discussion on this? Okay, it sounds like not. So our next topic is JS Contact. So there we go.
So, hello again. Yeah, so that next slide, is basically the unchanged version of what we discussed at the interim meeting a month ago. So I think almost everybody here was also there. So basically, the main point to take away from that slide is we are waiting for our implementations or other implementations to get better hands-on experience with the data format. Mario has at the moment has implemented the most of the data format. We at Fastmail are working with an old version of contacts data. And I hear that also the RDAP working group at IETF are working on implementations there, although I have no further details on which aspects they're covering. Mario, probably you want to have a word on this?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, just to make an additional note, because I was informed last Regex interim meeting that there are some JS Contact implementation inside RDAP. So as Robert has just said, the JS Contact in RDAP doesn't cover all the information that could be represented by JS Contact, only subset. Even if this subset, I think that this implementation could be meaningful nonetheless. So I probably will be contacted by the other guys or the RDAP working group who are implementing JS Contact in RDAP. So I will have some more feedback from that side. But my feeling is that in comparison to JCAD, obviously the JS Contact representation is more satisfactory in the RDAP context. So I don't believe that we will have relevant feedback to change the current JS Contact spec.
Okay. Then I guess we continue with the next slide, please. One one thing we got pointed at recently is a Unicode public review issue. You see the link here, which is concerned with defining personal name formatting. So that's highly relevant for the way we are using name data in JS Contact. This is an ongoing effort at Unicode. The issue is open for comments until the end of this year. While reading it, so basically it's concerned with the formatting and sorting of names and uses patterns mainly that define how to format several name components depending on the context. For example, context would be if you are addressing a person or if you are referring to a person, which given as an example in Russian, the order of name components is used differently then. It's also covering several other aspects. But the main point for JS Contact is that it's using name fields, which basically are very much aligned with what we are calling name components in JS Contact. So that's kind of that's good news that we at least seem to think in the same direction as other groups working on the same topic. So in terms of impact on the JS Contact implementation, we would like to be sure to align our name components type with that Unicode effort, but at the same stage keep the formatting and sorting aspects out of scope. So that's basically something where an application then could use the Unicode library or implement their own based on their definitions on how to format names in various contexts. And that means in practice, on the next slide, please, that we are just renaming two fields. The personal name we suggest to rename to given, and the additional name we want to rename to middle. One thing that we haven't covered, the Unicode document discerns between a surname and a secondary surname. The first intuition was that the order of a surname in JS Contact could just be deferred from its position in the array of name components. However, that in my opinion is not good enough. First, we cannot trust the fields, the name components to be in any meaningful order. Secondly, even if they are in a meaningful order, we still don't know what kind of order it is. And getting back to the example with Russian names that have different orders if you're addressing or referring to a person, we would not be the wiser what is the secondary surname in that context. So we suggest, what I wrote these slides, I was thinking of having a surname followed by a digit where digit is at least 2 or higher. But the more I think of it, we might even want to, since the name component already is a complex object, we might just want to add an additional optional property nth, which then can be an unsigned integer. And then we could basically use the same order thing for all different, for all kinds of name components, even if that would cover more than or allow more than the Unicode document is aiming at. Any opinions or remarks or other input on this one?
Am I on?
Yes.
I don't see a big difference between having an array and just stating in the text that the order should be the order of the surname in the array, or having a separate property for each surname, like with the end with a number in the end. In the end, it's the same thing, and the array thing, in my opinion, is a bit more elegant, a bit shorter, at least.
The
I'm not
problem
sure.
is they may appear in different orders in the way that the name is displayed than their meaning. So there are languages where that does, there could be either way around, but still be the primary surname and secondary surname.
So the system can a system can pick it out of an array or can pick it out of a property, right? But it may be easier than to pick it out of a separate property, is what you're saying?
I'm not sure. Maybe just to clarify, what do you mean when you speak of an array? So at the moment, at the moment the name is an array of name components, and these name components have a type, which is one of these in the column that you are seeing.
All right.
There is no array surname, for example.
All right. Okay, that's what I was missing. Okay, then it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
My only question is whether it's possible to give feedback to Unicode and say, hey, this is what we're doing with this. Do we have any communication with the group that's working on this?
No, not yet, but yes, I was thinking of contacting them. I just read the document yesterday, actually. But we should do that. Yeah.
All right, anything
Cool.
else on this topic anyone wants to discuss? Great, thank you, Robert.
Actually, I'm not finished with the JS contact talk, so there is no more slide, but I forgot to add. So one thing that we discussed at the interim meeting was the missing. In vCard, there is the gender property. We were in the interim discussing if and how to support that in JS Contact. We haven't come up with a solution yet. I remember that we were thinking of looking at where to ask at IETF if there is a recommendation by IETF across working groups for how to deal with that. There are a couple of different expectations on this gender field. The main expectation, the main use case, as I understood, is mainly to understand in languages that have different pronouns or addressing like a Mr. or Mrs., how to address that person or that contact depending on their gender. I don't know if I don't recall any other specific use case that was mentioned where gender plays a role. That being said, the vCard property already discerns between gender and also has then an optional field for sexual identity, I think it is. So the main gist still is, which I also stated at the last meeting, is both Mario and I do not feel confident in that field to really come up with a standard for this. So we might need to talk more with people who are working on this topic more extensively. And we don't really know, we haven't really figured out how to do that, basically.
Yes, sorry, this was partly I was supposed to do that. I did email Murray about it, who suggested contacting the IASG directly about it, which I have not yet done. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so but then I guess
I still have that action item.
Yeah, so basically we'll also need more time to figure out how to address that topic. That being said, also the Unicode document also has this as an open issue. So we will talk with them also what's their opinion, although they only need to narrow it down to cases where the formatting of a name depends of the gender of that person.
Pete mentioned in the chat that the IETF does have a formal liaison manager with Unicode and gave the name as well. So we have somebody to contact about that. So it might be worth mentioning both these issues in that discussion.
Great, thank you. Okay, so that's really now the end of my presentation.
Cool. So I guess just in terms of next steps on this document, it's dealing with these issues first and then coming back for a last call, or what, is there anything else outstanding?
Yeah, the implementation experience. I think that would be good to go into before going into last call to have a good understanding that we are covering everything we want to cover.
Cool.
Okay then. So the next topic is from Alexei again. Let me find the right slide, set of slides for that. There we go. And take it away, Alexei.
So yeah, very quickly, there is no extra working group meeting today or this week, but there are some people who are active in both GM and extra, so ask for extra time to introduce this. So yes, what's the problem statement? Basically, how server implementations deal with very big mailboxes, and what is a good client-side behavior to help servers handle this and not to overload them. When I say big mailbox, what do I mean? It's at least 50,000 messages. On the server side, it can be quite memory and resource usage intensive. Some servers struggle with keeping message number to UID map, depending on exactly the backend they're using. And some clients just cannot handle this. You know, there are clients that are limited to they're happy to open any mailbox, but they only show the last 10,000 messages. So yet at the same time, they still fetching flag changes or just general flags for all messages, even though they're going to ignore most of them. So some of this was already tackled. So constock quick resync extensions are definitely helping if clients want to use them. But this a bit more can be done. Next slide, please. So the proposal is extend search and fetch by specifying that only so many messages are expected in the result. So for search, this is actually partially defined in context equals search extension. Using the partial search result option. However, the proposal is to extend it a little bit because partial can say, well, return the first n messages or a certain block, but it starts from lower messages. So extension here is allow to ask for the and last messages, for example. So what's the advantage of this? This helps the server by saying, well, you only need to search n messages and then you can stop. So server implementations can optimize what they do. And also, if the client doesn't care about 50,000 results, then it can say, well, I only need 100. So this also optimizes network traffic. And similar extension to UID fetch, because UID fetch can specify UID range where the client doesn't actually know how many messages are in the range. Again, saying, I only care about so many messages. Next slide, please. So, search extension, partial originally defined in RFC 5267, but an extended syntax to allow negative ranges for addressing so many last messages as opposed to so many first messages. So this is an example. I want to search all undeleted messages not marked junk, and I only want the last 100. Next slide. Similar syntax for UID fetch. UID fetch already had fetch modifiers for const store, so we reuse the syntax and reuse the same partial construct here. Next slide. So what also good is actually we do have a wonderful IMAP feature when multiple extensions interact with each other in lots of interesting ways. We actually never defined how partial and save interact. So a reminder, save is saying save this result in an internal variable and don't return it. So now the document also define interaction between partial and save. Next slide. I know I just introduced this. I'm not going to ask for adoption here because it's the wrong working group and people need to have a time to think and read this. But my intent is to ask for adoption in the extra working group. Comments, questions? Bron, you were smiling. I know you have something to say. We couldn't hear you.
First thing I have to say is don't make the Windows key on your keyboard the screen lock key when you accidentally hit it occasionally, because I just locked my whole system up and then mistyped my password trying to log back in, so I couldn't get in to re-enable myself. I was smiling about the -1 because that is what the asterisk or star operator is. The very much misunderstood operator that means the last item, or the item with the highest UID specifically. This whole -1 syntax is yet another weird thing in IMAP, and it's fine, but it's also like IMAP is so syntactically edgy and tricky to deal with. But
well, if people have better suggestion, I just thought it was cute just because it was used in Python and other places. But
yeah, I think it's definitely worth taking it to extra and asking for adoption. It looks implementable. And if you get one client and server using it, then it could expand out. So, sure. I saw in the chat that Ken and Pete talked about the IMAP X view extension, which was published some long time ago. July 2000. There you go. So I'll put a link to that in the minutes as well.
Alexei was certainly around for that. It probably brings back some bad memories. I don't think that went very far with that draft.
Yeah, it's also complexity of implementing, like partials actually is fairly easy to implement. And, I know that there are multiple implementations of partial already.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, I think Vue probably tried to do too much at the time.
Yeah, because it tried to be like more like a mailbox, which caused all kind of interesting things. And partial also doesn't try to deal with updates, which is quite nasty. Well, has a bunch of interesting issues with it.
Cool.
But yeah, that's a good point. I'll have a look at the view and see if there is anything there that can be rescued.
All right, any other comments? So I guess the next thing is to go through working group milestones. So Ron, that's I think that's your thing.
Yeah. Yep. Just hang on a second while I pull them
just
up.
sorry, did this skip any other business? So is this the final?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Most
I'm
other
sorry.
business.
Sorry, I would have one thing, but I'm not sure if this is desired to be discussed. So question is mainly, I think, to Ken and maybe Alexei. This is about this thief implicit standard thing I mentioned in the last CARConnect interim meeting. And I think, Alexei, you asked me to send this to the extra group. However, it didn't really spark in there. So the question is how to proceed with that.
I still owe you a response.
No worries.
Well, it is difficult in the sense that we probably wouldn't want to modify CIF syntax because that will be just too disruptive. But if we can have a structured comments, I think that's probably the way forward. But yeah, absolutely. I think this is the problem that we're solving because multiple people run into it. It's quite a common thing.
All right.
So yeah, I have it on my to-do list. I haven't forgotten. I'm sorry, just
no worries.
Right.
Absolutely fine. Maybe also in the direction of Ken, because I think our use case initially was stemming from JMap, our implementation of JMap for Thief in JMap, even though we experienced the same problem with raw Thief under managed Thief. So, but for JMap, actually, we currently also could do with it by ourselves with the means of the standard. Because we thought about also transmitting basically a product ID via the capabilities. So that's a little bit, maybe, I don't know if this is intended usage of the capabilities, but I think it's not strictly forbidden. And that would actually allow us to do what we want. So we can currently live with that and work around it the same way we work around with it in the managed Thief case. Maybe that as an
yeah, sorry, Hans Jorg, I had to stay muted because my dog was barking at the FedEx guy. Yeah. So the issue you're having is that the implementation that you're trying to write or trying to use doesn't support blobs. I'm not sure I was fully.
Oh no. So the blob thing is a different thing, and that is also okay. We can work with that. So some of my remarks were also maybe for other people having to deal with the same issues. So we just found that a little bit difficult, but we certainly were able to do it. Yeah? So okay. Certainly the things that I think Neil presented make sense, so we can do it that way. The only another open issue was that issue with implicit conventions. Yeah? So to make a particular example, for instance, we wrote a JMap for Thief wrapper for Horde groupware. Yeah? And for instance, Horde internally has names for the rules, which it displays in the UI. to the user, because typically you define the thief rule in the Horde web UI.
Can you clarify what you mean by rule? Are you talking about an entire script or just a portion of a script?
Yeah, that's also an interesting question, I think, which I wrote in the post. So typically, the kind of systems we deal with when we deal with thief, I think there is actually in the wild there is two major things how people use thief. One is people engineering their own whole script, and one is thief scripts basically generated by systems such as a webmailer. And these thief scripts tend to be quite regular, so they consist basically of a set of individual rules. That's basically at least what we observed in projects so far. Yeah? And I would argue maybe the second case is actually the majority of thief usage, because not so many people will engineer their own thief scripts by hand, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, certainly that second case is, I think, a valid case, because you have thief rules within systems like Horde, yeah, and which are created by users. And within that single script, which Horde maintains in the backend, there are the individual rules which the user created in the UI, like move that mail from Bron to folder Bron and so on. Does it clarify your understanding?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if we could even use JMap to manage a set of rules without having just crazy things happen. Because if you've got a handful of rules, they probably need to be executed in a particular order, which the webmailer or the fastmail UI is well aware of, and that when it constructs the script, it does it in the correct order.
So technically, these rules are a thief script. They are a valid thief script and are interpreted by a thief backend, as far as I know. Yeah? It's just a convention how these systems build the thief scripts. That's my understanding here.
Right. So
yeah. So the interesting question is, can you annotate the rules with something that allows you to have the name so it displays in the UI? In the Fastmail UI, they display. I think it's just a description of the actual content of the rule. We don't have a way to label them with a label as well. But I could see where. Oh yeah, no, there is a. Here we have a thing you can name your rule. There you go. So the Fastmail UI does precisely that.
Okay. So where is it stored?
I was going to say, if it's an entire script, you could give the name, to the script. If it's a single rule that's interpreted as a script, it's the same thing, right? And I guess if we wanted to add another field for a comment or a longer description, we could also do that. But I think what we have is probably sufficient, unless someone else has a stronger view.
Well, so this is what it looks like in the Fastmail UI, and these get generated down to Civ, and if we were to look at one of these, there's an ability to put a name.
Okay. How do you expose that in Civ?
So let's have a look. I can show you right now. Oh, sorry, that's blocked senders. I clicked the wrong thing. I wanted to see my custom Civ code.
Okay.
So this is the Civ that gets generated, and I can put blocks of custom Civ in as well. So this header gets added to every single email that I receive. There you go. So it's just a comment above it.
Okay.
Like so. So this is the variables and complex structure stuff that we build for our Civ rules now.
Okay, so I have basically two points here. Yeah? So one point is this is certainly an interoperability issue. If you think about migrating rules from one system to the other, and probably also with tools editing scripts. Because I don't know if you expose managed Civ, Bron, but for instance, if a client would mess up that comment, it would mess up the UI, which is not nice. Yeah? I think you agree, right?
Yeah, we don't expose managed Civ.
Okay, so that is basically, and there is not just comments. There is also, I sketched in the initial mail. There's priorities. Sometimes you can define, or those special use kind of annotations you have to rules, which may sort it in some way or the other in the UI. So that's point one, and we don't need to discuss further here. I think that was the mail I sent to the extra group, and probably it's better there than here in the JMap working group, just to sort things out. My second point was we have the practical problem of doing the implementation for JMap for Sieve in a particular case, where we need a way to know how to interpret the rule coming from the JMap backend. So to know, for instance, this JMap for Sieve server is actually serving us a rule coming from a Horde convention. So we can actually apply some special logic that, or parsing where we know this is how Horde does format the rule name or something like that. Because otherwise we cannot correctly, transfer it. And my message was, for the second aspect, we found a workaround. So we can use the JMap capabilities in order to, convey the information. This is Horde implementation. So we are basically fine here, which brings us back to the first aspect, which was actually a successor of the second one initially, which we can follow up in extra. Sorry, I just wanted to state that. Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like Alexi and I both have actions to reply to you on the extra mailing list.
All right, thanks.
One other comment on the blob thing, Hans-Jörg. I know you had some concerns about multiple round trips to fetch the scripts. I uploaded a new version of the draft yesterday morning, I think, which shows how to use blob get in addition to either civ script get or a query to basically fetch the script content in one round trip.
Okay, awesome. I'll have a look. Maybe as a meta remark here, and maybe also to Neil, especially, who took quite some effort to respond to my email. So most of these comments were also meant to be some feedback which we had based on how we perceived on how to implement it. So personally, I think this could be, so the JMap for Sieve thing, I think could be in practice be really useful for many people using Sieve to finally allow to expose existing Sieve rules, which probably didn't want to expose managed Sieve so far implemented. And my feeling was that, this blob kind of thing makes it a little bit difficult to understand on how to do it, or poses some restrictions on people that maybe have a bunch of rules on a local drive, because sometimes they are just stored on a file system. And I thought things could probably be easier in there, but I'm totally fine. I see your argument that it also makes sense to keep things a little bit consistent. But that's just part of my larger mission to also raise a voice a little bit for thinking in the design of JMap, also about people which don't design a whole system from scratch in a nice and funky way, but maybe want to use only pieces of JMap, and might a little bit be overwhelmed by some restrictions in there. I know there is no clean way out of this, and I appreciate the feedback by Neil. I hope that wasn't too aggressive on the email list or something like that. I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, if you compare it to the body parts in an email, we allow you to fetch the text of part of the body of an email inline rather than giving you a blob ID and telling you to go fetch that blob ID, partly because we didn't have all this blob infrastructure then. But I can see an argument for doing the same thing with Civ to allow you to fetch the raw text of it as part of the fetch, as well as giving you a blob ID. So that becomes different things you can fetch on the script. Yes, it's more than one way, but we do that with other data types. So we can keep discussing that.
Okay.
Is there anything else before we go on to the milestone review? Sorry, I forgot to call that before. So, Bron, you're on.
Yeah, let's do it. Just go through the screen sharing dance. This is what one we're looking at. So these are what we have at the moment. Adopt SMIME Advanced. We did that, I believe. That is adopted, right? SMIME Sender Extensions. Presumably that's what it's now called. Yep, cool. So we'll update that. GEMAP access to address books. When do we think we're going to get to that, Robert?
Not before we got JS Contact, at least until we got the implementation experience with JS Contact. So yeah, spring next year. I don't know when next IETF is, but yeah.
I don't even know when spring is. Depends which part of the world you're in.
Yeah, true. Sorry for that.
I'm going to say April 2022.
Yeah.
Submit JMAP calendars to IESG. That's probably also, I think, all these things that are currently December, except for maybe Blob. Blob, I expect, will get submitted in next month. Civ, what do you reckon, Ken?
Still waiting on some implementation experience with the test method, and I guess we probably still need to revisit the blob versus inline script data issue. So I think December is probably not doable. Probably early next year, I hope.
Yep. Cool.
Maybe,
so
maybe
might
before,
say
maybe before Bangkok or wherever it's going to end up.
Yep.
You want to change the name on that to reflect that it's been adopted? So it's a...
Yeah. I'll do the whole lot as a batch. I'm just putting notes in the minutes now for what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, everything. JMAP quotas is the other final document here, which we didn't discuss at this meeting, but there has been some movement on that. So we'll leave that for now.
Now that extra quota is nearly done, I'll probably have some cycles to read it again.
Cool. And after all that, we only have 7 minutes left. Does anybody have anything else? Let me unshare. It's always very quiet in these groups, but quite productive.
Well, this was good use of time, I think.
Yeah.
Murray has something to say.
Just a quick, I saw you messing around with milestones, but I haven't seen any emails come through that you're editing any. Is that correct?
Oh, no, I haven't edited anything yet. I've just been typing it into the minutes.
Okay, thanks.
I will mess with all the milestones and send all the actions. Yep. Are you feeling more awake now, Murray?
Be gentle. Yeah, a little bit more. I've been working while listening, and yeah, I agree. It's pretty productive. Thanks. Thanks for tending to your milestones too. Some groups are kind of slack about that.
Yeah, I stood up in a working group chairs meeting and told people that it's reasonable to be held accountable 3 times a year to what you've promised to do. So I figured I'd better set a good example, because otherwise I'm a hypocrite And though I am a hypocrite, it's good not to be a hypocrite in this specific thing. Cool. Thanks, Jim. And thanks, everybody. Let's go hang in gather or something. I'll see some of you in half an hour.
We'll see you then.
See you. Thanks.
Thank you.